All right, it is 6:02 and we have people logging on, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Allie Fisher. I'm the MC for tonight, and I'm the Wildlife and Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Associate for Oregon Wild. Thank you all for joining us for the Protecting Old Growth Forests for Climate Justice webcast. I'm really honored to introduce our many wonderful guests tonight. First, we have Catherine Quaid, who is the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for the Women's Earth Climate Action Network, aka WECAN, and was born and raised in rural Central Oregon and is a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla. Next, we have Wanda Culp, who is the WECAN Coordinator in the Tongass region of Alaska, and is an Indigenous Tlingit activist, advocate, and hunter, fisher, and gatherer of wild foods. Next, we have Rebecca Contreras, who is the Tongass WECAN representative and is a Yupik white climate advocate living in Hoonah, Alaska. Lastly, Osprey Oriole Lake is the founder and executive director of WECAN, and her work is national and international with grassroots and frontline women, leaders, policymakers, and diverse coalitions to build women's leadership and climate justice. I would also like to offer gratitude to the land itself tonight and for those who have lived here in the United States since time immemorial. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous people on the land today. Sorry about that. Have a rowdy dog in the background. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous peoples on the land today. The history of tribes is complex and nuanced and includes colonial legacies and wrongdoings like forced removal that have long-lasting and current impacts. It is important to not only acknowledge Indigenous people and the land, but continue to do meaningful work by supporting them in the present, respecting and uplifting tribal sovereignty, doing your research, and taking action. Additionally, a recording of this program will be emailed out this week and will be posted on our website, OregonWild.org, in the Wild blog. Please enter your questions at any time in the Q&A section. We normally get a flood of questions right at the end of the presentation. So the sooner you can get yours in, the easier it will be for me to organize and answer them after our guests have finished presenting. Since we have so many wonderful presenters, I'll also be popping in occasionally with 2-minute warnings if needed, just to keep us on track to make sure everyone has the time they need to speak. Lastly, make sure to sign up for our next webinar about snowshoeing Mount Hood. Now, I think that's enough of me talking, so I'm going to pass it off to our first presenter, Catherine Quaid. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks so much, Allie. I appreciate it, and appreciate Oregon Wild for hosting this awesome event. Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine. I am Paiute, Cayuse, and Nez Perce. It was cool to see my tribes on the little map of Oregon there. I'm a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla, and I currently work as the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for WECAN. I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm excited to be with Wanda, Rebecca, and Osprey. We've been working together for several years on various forest protection projects that I'm excited, we'll get to share with you today. And as Allie said, I was born and raised and grew up in Warm Springs and Madras, right here in Central Oregon. My home stretches from the snow-capped summits of the Cascade Mountains to the palisaded cliffs of the Deschutes River, which flows toward the Nichiwana, which people call the Columbia River. And these have been the homelands of my ancestors since time immemorial. And these lands are a part of me and lie at the core of why I am committed to climate justice and why I am committed to doing this work. Since I was little, my family and I would go up into the mountains to pick huckleberries, those small purple berries, sweet and tart, that have been a part of my community's diet and culture for generations. Every summer in that dry August air, we would drive up the dusty forest roads in search of the berry bushes. I would wander through the trees, listening to the woodpeckers, picking berries that were supposed to be saved for the coming year to share with loved ones. And inevitably, many of the berries in my basket would end up sneakily being eaten, with the only very obvious evidence being my purple stained smile. I treasured these moments where all of the pieces of my identity collided. And as I grew into adulthood, I started noticing how this experience of picking berries every year started to shift, and how those late August days out in the berry patches started coming earlier in July even, and how those clear blue skies that poked through the treetops would instead be covered by wildfire smoke that would hang heavy in the forest. This is when I started to connect the dots, to notice how the changing climate, the extending drought, the decreasing snowfall, the increasing wildfires, how all of those impacts fueled by climate change were directly threatening the practices and cultural traditions that my community has carried forward for generations. And even just this year, we went out in August, and it was really upsetting. We were trying to pick the berries and they were all white and dried out from the drought. They didn't get enough water this year, and they were inedible. We weren't actually able to gather as much as we usually need for the full year. So, it's very obvious that it's getting worse every year. And these forest ecosystems across the mountains have been a refuge for tribal communities in Oregon for generations. And they're not only places where we can pick berries, but they're also where my uncles go hunting, where people collect mushrooms, where, you kind of find all those high plateau meadows for root digging and so much more. And so these forests are a critical part of our Indigenous food sovereignty and cultural practices, as well as critical for maintaining a balance for biodiversity and reciprocity. And, I was reading about how Oregon forests are actually almost half the state. They cover over 30.5 million acres. And yet, I'm looking at this map, and actually when we compare it to that map that we just saw, that Allie showed us, of all the various tribes and Indigenous communities, we aren't seeing that there is still management or stewardship from those tribes or Indigenous communities over the forests that exist right now in Oregon. And this is despite the fact that over 80% of remaining global biodiversity is cared for and managed by Indigenous people, or that there are so many studies that show that Indigenous peoples are effective stewards of biodiverse ecosystems. So to me, it is clear that tribal sovereignty and management of these ecosystems that we've been a part of for generations is a very real climate solution that could not only protect biodiversity and stop clear cutting, but also help mitigate the impacts of climate change, which are only going to worsen in coming years. And I don't know, I'm sure a lot of us live in Oregon. We have seen the proliferation of wildfires and the fire season, which has become so erratic and long, like getting fires in June or September and having those fires run longer, being worsened by the ongoing drought, by having dry, forest and tinder. And it's sad, it's upsetting. Like, not only are we getting that pollution in our bodies as well, but these are our homelands. And so for me, I'm coming to this work not only focused on the species that exist in these forests, right? Like the wolves and all the animals and all these really beautiful forests and trees, which are important. But for me, it runs deeper than that. And it is informed by my own community's deep commitment and connection to the land. And, there are no berry feasts without berries. There is no salmon without the snow melt from the mountains. There is no elk without the meadows along the tree line. And without those, there is no culture. How can we practice our culture when we don't have the foods that are so intrinsically tied to who we are? And so I'm really here to protect the forest, actually, to protect my culture, to protect my community and my tribe. And that is what is informing the solutions that I seek and the work that I want to commit to. And I think that's why it's so important to work with tribal communities to really figure out, how we can move forward to protect forest ecosystems in a good way. And I think, especially in Oregon, there's an opportunity to consider what stewardship, co-management, kind of whatever you want to call it, looks like with tribes, because we have strong tribal communities and strong indigenous communities in urban areas as well, like in Portland and Salem, all along I-5 corridor. And we have leaders in our communities who have the generational knowledge about these forests and these plants and animals, to really be included in the conversation when we're talking about protection and conservation. And I think just, connecting to some of the other speakers that we're going to hear from, we've seen how engagement in advocacy efforts is leading to successful protection of old growth forests in other areas like Alaska, which Wanda and Rebecca, I'm sure, will speak to, that and the roadless rule and all the great work happening up there. And so there are many examples of how Indigenous peoples are really standing up for forests and the land every day, and how we will continue to stand up for our communities and the earth, and that we are standing up, right, to fight for our rights as a continuation of love and power that comes from our ancestors, and that extends to ensure that we have a healthy and thriving future for future generations. And, so I think we were talking a little bit before we started of how, we've been at COP27 in Egypt. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity is happening right now. And all these governments are meeting to essentially negotiate our lives away. We're not in those rooms, and we know what's coming. And there are so many reports coming out, every year about what will happen in the coming decades as climate chaos becomes, worsens, and as we see more climate disasters, as we see more wildfires. And so I think now more than ever, we need Indigenous solutions at the forefront. We need intersectional, creative, collaborative approaches and paradigms that hold the complexity of our existence and match the urgency of this moment. Approaches that are grounded in justice and care for each other and the planet. And as an Indigenous climate organizer, I'm honored to follow in the work of brilliant leaders who are giving everything to protect forests and biodiversity, build innovative climate solutions, resist systems of oppression that kind of put us into this situation, and imagine a healthy and just future for me, for you, and for our entire planet. So I thank you for, all the work that you're doing. I thank you for being here, for listening to us. And now I'm just happy to pass it off to Wanda and Rebecca. So thank you so much, and Katsiaya.
Sheesh. My name is Wanda Culp. I'm Tlingit, Southeast Alaska, Tongass Forest. And also, it's been mentioned, I'm the coordinator for the Women for Forests, Tongass WECAN. And I was born and raised in political Juneau, Alaska, which is the capital city. I was also raised in my traditional Tlingit village of Huna. I am the coordinator for the Women's Forest, Tongass Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, WECAN, we call it. We are a group of Indigenous Alaska matrilineal granddaughters, daughters, nieces, sisters, aunts, mothers, grandmothers, speaking out on behalf of our children and grandchildren's future. There's a law that impacted us hugely called the 1971 Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, called the ANSCA, that has a cutoff date that literally split my family in two when it happened, 1971. One daughter is an ANSCA shareholder since she was born in 1969. The other one is not, because she was born in early 1972. So ANSCA is not all encompassing. Our native claims is actually an extermination strategy that Congress initiated back in those days. It's a strategy that, is connected to the United States public law termination policies of American Indians. I know you're familiar with that down south. Alaska is the hottest state in the union right now, not only for global warming, but for free big money industrial exploitation on behalf of privatizing publicly owned resources of America, public land. The state of Alaska and the big industry is stepping all over the rights of the people, the rights of the land. I'm talking about oil, gas, mining, timber, wild salmon exploitation, as well as old growth and mature forests. So we look at the whole picture. We're not segmenting our focus on just timber because the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act is so unjust. We've joined a movement across Alaska to fix this. The big industry in Alaska is unmonitored. Alaskans and Americans are pretty much ignorant of these two public laws, Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and Alaska Native Lands Interest Conservation Act, ANILCA. This is where this is a law that's been harvesting across America also. It affects you folks down south as well. On the roadless rule, is all connected. All these laws are connected. I'm hoping I'm not confusing everybody. But the strategy of Congress to get to our natural resources is all by design. And it's pretty shameless, and it should stay in last century's thinking and operation. What we stand today, right now, with Oregon for the wild, today in solidarity with Alaska's battle for the wild. The roadless rules graduation into Code of Federal Regulations will be the work product of many Alaska Native tribal member shareholder voices, united and blended with American national land conservation interest protections as well. We've joined and been heard. It has taken decades. And here we are now facing the strength of our unity over industrial greed and destruction. Yay for each of us and yay to all of us. Tongass Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, WECAN, would like to call on your support of reinterpreting last century's ANILCA and ANSCA laws into today's reality of global health and warming crises by looking into those public laws and learn how political puppetry works against the people and legal land protection rights across America. These are fixable laws. Together, we can make the changes those legal actions were originally targeted for. Right now, it's focused on industrial overtake and destruction with no mitigation, when the settlements should have been towards Alaska Native people and the communities that live on this land. This is, I wanted to mention briefly that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, also the drilling for oil and gas is also under this ANILCA law, while the Willow mining project in the Bering Sea is another ANILCA law, as well as the timber that we're trying to protect. So Chish, I'm so glad to be here talking with you folks. It's good to see your faces. And we'll let Rebecca speak now. I get baby.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Contreras, and I'm living here in the Tongass. And you're hearing a lot about the roadless rule. The roadless rule began in the 90s to protect from the industrial logging boom, and many areas with old growth forests were logged out, and it's active in many Northwest states in the United States. We traveled to DC advocating for roadless rule codification into law. So in 2018 or 2019, Lisa Murkowski, our senator, attempted a budget rider that included the removal of the roadless rule. When Indigenous women from the Tongass Forest found out about the budget writer, we spoke out in the Huffington Post, and we also went to DC to speak to Congress and 14 decision-making offices, and also the US Representative Deb Haaland, who is now our Secretary of Interior. Public interests and Native nations spoke out and supported the Road This Rule. We came back home to Alaska and began speaking out at the Federal Subsistence Board, Southeast Regional Advisory Council meetings, and our voices caught attention. And we helped create the Indigenous Management Work Group, and that produced recommendations of tribal co-management of natural resources to the U.S. Office of Subsistence Management this October in 2022. So what's the question of Alaska's connection to the forest and why is it important to the Road This Rule? It accommodates our way of life, our food, and the connection of the way that we catch food, we make our food, and we celebrate our food has been determined as subsistence, which means survival, existence, and maintenance. When we feel our way of life is so much more than survival, because we thrive on our natural foods. We are allowed by the state of Alaska to do this. So when we found out that our senator was trying to remove the protection of old growth, which is where our food and way of life happens, we had to protect it. Since we have been creating documents called Food First and Green versus Green, the base of it is food sovereignty. So if any profits of the land happen to interfere with our food, we do not engage because we're putting food first and the green land versus the green money. So why is the Road This Rule important? To the question of why is the Road This Rule important, we have been determining descriptions of our own selves and confirming our generational place in the future. We are sovereign individual women who are politically active in protecting our world. Being active in politics and protecting means we have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and wild food to eat. It's important for our future generations to have this opportunity too. At one point, all the roots of the forest from Alaska to California to across the nation were connected to each other. We can make that happen again if we move quickly and wisely. Women for Forest is expecting codification into law of the Road This Rule so that we no longer have to call it a rule, which is easily manipulated by political powers. So, thank you all for listening, and I'd like to pass it on to Osprey Oriole Lake.
Thanks so much. It's really an honor to be here with all of you at Oregon Wild. Thanks for inviting the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network to join you this evening. And I really want to thank Catherine and Wanda and Rebecca for your powerful words. I feel very honored to work with all of you and the beautiful and powerful voices and efforts that you all represent. I wanted to start by sort of giving an overview at a global level. We kind of planned this so we would hear sort of the local and broader regional and then looking at it sort of internationally. And I think it's really interesting that women have defending and protecting trees has a really long history. And one really prominent example that some of you may know about is the women of the Chipko movement in India. The movement is based on the Gandhian movement that was founded on nonviolent principles of something called Satyagraha. And the Chipko, as some of you might know, means to hug. And the successful Chipko movement was generated by rural women in the 1970s in the Himalayas, surrounding and literally hugging trees in their community to stop escalating deforestation due to industrial logging. And it's been a great inspiration for us and learning for many of us is this long history of women organizing around protecting forests. Globally, some of you might know, that many experts have agreed that we're losing upwards of about 80,000 acres of tropical rainforest daily, and we degrade about another 80,000 acres every day on top of that. So we have a lot of work to do to protect our forests. And as a women's organization, it's really important to us to understand the gender lens and what women are doing, especially as drivers of solutions to forest protection. And particularly Indigenous women that you're hearing from tonight. We know from tropical to temperate rainforests, Indigenous women in particular are organizing to restore damaged forests, ecosystems, protect vital old growth forests, their homelands, to share traditional knowledge and stories, and fighting to uphold Indigenous rights and sovereignty. As you were hearing about, this incredible need to understand the intersection and relationship between Indigenous rights, sovereignty, and protection of biodiversity and forests. And in light of this, we need to ensure and defend the rights and sovereignty of Indigenous land defenders who are protecting, as Catherine said, over 80% of all the biodiversity left on the planet, which exists mostly in forests. So our WECAN Women for Forest program is growing in response to an increase both in biodiversity loss and in carbon emissions, and the threats that come to all of our communities. We're currently working in 3 regions in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador and Brazil and in the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as the Tongass rainforest, as you heard. And it's been just such an honor to be in this incredible struggle to reinstate the roadless rule in the Tongass, but also the deeper analysis that you're hearing from Wanda and Rebecca about getting at the root cause of really having Indigenous peoples really managing their own lands again. And I wanted to take a minute before I go forward to share with you a video about our work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, just so we get a little bit of a different context. And then I'll share some more about Ecuador and Brazil. But Catherine, if you could just tee up the DR Congo video, that would be great. Thank you.
Great, 1 second.
When I come back here after 25 years, I was shocked. When I was a little girl, the forest was here. And when I was here, I see no more trees. Idea was how again people can bring life back.
As the climate crisis increases, scientists are telling us that one of the most important things that we can do is to protect forests and biodiversity. The Congo Basin is one of the largest and most important forests of the world, only second to the Amazon in terms of size. And there we are reforesting damaged lands that due to extractive industries, agricultural business, have been completely turned into deserts.
We have now 500 women. We are planting those trees. And when you're planting trees, you are honor those trees and you are honor on the land. That is not usual on our culture, women to have some propriety, some ownership. That gives us really confidence.
kandi nije uzubibagarira iri ni ishyamba ryanje
75% of the trees are going to rewilding the forest. Some of them now are 20 feet tall, and we're quickly seeing the forest begin to regenerate, and 25% are for human use so that we can ensure that we're protecting the 1.6 million acres of old-growth forest. This is where their food comes from, where their medicines come from, where the things they need for their homes come from, their pharmacy.
ibiti akamaro ko kubitera icyo bimarira n'icyo mbitegeyemo cyane ni ukugira ngo tuzongere tubone imvura muri iki gihugu cyacu ibiti byarashize turifuza yuko ibino biti za weekend zokomeza tukongera tukagarura amashamba.
Women, they are now protecting environment with trees. Women of Itombe forest, natural forest from DRC, we are trying to protect our environment.
We're now protecting 1.6 million acres of old-growth forest over the years as we reforest in the Congo Basin.
kuko byamariye njyewe ku giti cyanje bimpesha iheba nziza muri iki gihugu cyacu.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a real need to develop more food sovereignty and food security. So now not only in the nurseries that we have are we planting sapling trees, but also lots of food for the local communities.
Vegetables we did really help so much. People to have vegetables to fight with malnutrition.
And the women are just so proud to not only be planting trees and healing their damaged homelands, but also protecting this old growth forest for all of us, for doing their part in mitigating the climate crisis. So for all of these things, it's a very comprehensive project that's lifting up women, lifting up Indigenous peoples and their traditional ways of life, protecting old growth forest and reforesting damaged lands.
All these forests will become soon big one, and we want to really to have again bring new oxygen. Winds will be stopping winds, and it really very, very, very important. Trees, they are life.
Thanks, Catherine. So that's just one of the projects we wanted to share with you to bring in some of the global aspect. And, you know, as we've been talking about, one of the most important factors in forest protection has to do with Indigenous people and local communities who are often the backbone of these movements to defend their ancestral forest homelands. Yet at the same time, I think we really need to surface and bring forward that Indigenous peoples have major struggles with mining, illegal logging, agricultural business companies, and their private security firms who often are backed by governments entering their territories violently and with no consent. And we have seen this in different places in Africa and certainly in South America where we work. And we know from reports from Global Witness and others that there's been really an increase of threats and murders of environmental defenders around the world. And again, very strongly in the Latin American region. And some of our close partners have been receiving death threats for their work and as they work to defend their forests. And women are even more vulnerable as land defenders due to sexual threats and violence when they speak out. So it's a really important part of our work that we also need to stand up and speak out to defend the defenders who are putting their bodies on the line, all their efforts to protect forest for their own communities, but for all of us. One of the important things that we're working on right now is something called the Escazú Agreement, which we have been advocating for the last 5 years, and it was just passed recently. So we're very excited about this, and it's a bilateral agreement amongst Latin American Caribbean countries that both protects the environment, but also has a human rights component. And it's very unusual to see an environmental law that also has a human rights component to it, so that there's a recognition that there is a need to protect land defenders while we're also protecting the environment. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but we can put a link for you to learn more about this really interesting new law that will be really important to land defenders in Latin America and protecting the Amazon rainforest as an example. I also wanted to mention a report called The Power and Potential, released by the Rights and Resources Initiative, which discusses women's ability to access forests and to take part in decision-making regarding forest use and how this is crucial to conservation and climate change mitigation. The report highlights that land tenure is fully linked to environmental issues, as women are known to play a key role protecting water, forests, and their communities, as we've been talking about. And yet women in many regions are denied land rights due to patriarchal structures, colonization, as Wanda was talking about, and other factors. So the report goes on to say that forests and women together are a climate solution. And I think that's really important as a big takeaway, is that there's a role of women leaders in climate solutions that we really need to lift up and realize is really key to this moment in time. And that these community-based tenure regimes to ensure that this solution is not eroded by vested interest is really something that we can all engage in. So for us, this lens is really important as we're looking at forest protection, to also recognize that this is a key role. The last thing I wanted to say, and then I'm going to hand the floor back over to our moderator, is just talking about the fact of the beautiful work that's been going on for millennium in Indigenous communities, but is now being talked about by modern scientists around mother trees and how important they are. And the fact of work like Suzanne Simmerd, who's really bringing forward the fact that we have to protect old growth forests. Because when, as Suzanne says, a forest is clear cut and the big trees are taken out, it's like its central nervous system is cut and it won't ever be the same. So I also want to say, even though we know that it's so important to reforest damaged lands, and reforestation is key to really the damage that we have done to our beautiful ancient forests, it's also important to remember that one of the most important things we can do is to honor the old growth forests and to stand up for them and to fight for them. So thanks so much for listening to all of us. Really appreciate being here, and glad to hand the floor back over to you over at Oregon Wild.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. That was really amazing to hear all of your personal experiences and all of the work that WECAN and TWECAN is doing as well. We're just going to have a quick 5-minute presentation from our forest climate campaign, and then we'll do a Q&A for the rest of our time. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to those shortly. Okay, Victoria, it's all you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all so much for being here, and to our panelists. It really is wonderful to share this evening with you all. I'm going to pull up a slideshow to keep myself on track. So one moment. Okay. So yes, I am the Forest and Climate Campaigner at Oregon Wild, and most of my work is focusing on the grassroots efforts of the Climate Forest Campaign. And that's actually how I've been connected to some of the panelists tonight. So the campaign launched this past February, and it really is a national effort to establish some federal protections for mature and old growth forests. We are pushing for a rule that would protect trees starting at 80 years and older. And so far, we are working with over 150 different organizations across the country. Together, we represent more than 5 million members and supporters. And we are constantly growing and learning. And it's really great to have the opportunity to present with some of the other organizations in our coalition, such as WECAN. So we are working to respond to President Biden's executive order that he announced this past Earth Day. Essentially, it directed federal agencies to do a 3-part process, where stage 1 is to conduct an inventory of the mature and old growth forests on federal lands. They'd also sought to seek some input on defining them. So what even are these forests? What are they considering to be mature and old growth? And then the final step is to develop policies to protect them. And so we are working really hard to make sure that this executive order turns into policy that has some teeth, and that it really does give these essential climate saving forests the federal protections that they deserve, and that a diversity of voices are represented in whatever policies come out of this executive order as well. So since the executive order, this campaign has just been pretty much go, go, go the whole time. In June, USDA released a secretarial memo responding to the executive order. And not only did it not call for protections of these forests, but it also did not recognize logging as a threat as well. And so our campaign worked in July to prove them wrong. We know that logging is a threat to these forests. Like many of our other panelists have mentioned today, industrial logging and greed really has done a number on these forests that provides so many benefits for communities, for wildlife, for clean water, clean air. And so we released a report called Worth More Standing that outlined 10 of the most egregious examples of mature and old growth forest logging projects that are taking place on federally managed lands. And then in August was our first opportunity to really weigh in an official way. So USDA released a public comment period looking for input on definitions for these forests. And so we rallied as much support as we could across the country, and about more than 130,000 folks weighed in, calling for a rule, asking for lasting protections. So it was really exciting to see that, and just to see this momentum building more and more over time. And then this past November was especially exciting. It was the 6-month mark from the executive order, and unfortunately, not enough has been done since then. So we released yet another progress report on how federal agencies have been responding to President Biden's executive order, and we outlined an additional 22 logging projects that are taking place across the country. And this report served as really a rallying cry for forest defense groups that are on the ground working to protect these special places. And we all came together for a national week of forest and climate action across the country. The folks on the panel tonight held a successful rally in Juneau, Alaska. We also had one in Portland, Oregon, Missoula, Montana, Vermont, West Virginia, and New Mexico. And it was really exciting to see all of this come together in such a beautiful way, really. So what comes next? We are getting ready for the new year, and developing different strategies and plans and tactics for all of the work ahead. So our number one priority is to foster and cultivate new and old relationships with more Indigenous, climate-focused, and social justice-focused organizations and communities. We really want to make sure that we are well informed with the policies that we put forward to the Biden administration, and that we take all of the needs of frontline communities that feel the greatest impacts from climate change, that they're focused on first and foremost. Slide. We are putting the spotlight on the United States Department of Agriculture and the Department of the Interior. They are the ones who are number one in the list of carrying out President Biden's executive orders. So we're asking them to work quickly. And as Catherine mentioned before, we really want them to recognize the urgency of this situation. If it takes several years to develop policies to protect these forests, with over 300,000 acres of them being on the chopping block right now, there might not be anything left to protect. So we are pushing them to work quickly, so that we can stand as a global model for forest protection. And there's a few different things that you all can do to take action. I am happy to share the link to America's Vanishing Climate Forests report in the chat. That's our most recent update on the work that we've been doing to really dig through all of the information on these logging projects, and we've synthesized it in a way that we just want to make sure everybody sees it. There's so many special places that are highlighted in this report that are well worthy and deserving of all of our attention, and we want to make sure that we can come together and take stand so that they can remain standing for future generations. It's also fantastic when groups write letters to the editor, writing and even ghostwriting op-eds. Every bite out of the media apple that we can get is incredibly helpful for our campaign. That way we can make sure that the Biden administration sees that there is widespread support for protecting these forests, and we will make sure that we get it out in front of him as well. And the last thing on my list here is to join our mailing list, of course. We have a few different types. If you are wanting to take action as an individual, you can sign up for our grassroots mailing list, where we'll give you campaign updates, and make sure to share with you every opportunity to sign a petition or a letter or if there's an event happening locally that you could attend. But we also have mailing lists for groups that are working with an organization who would like to be more involved with our campaign. And on that list, we'll send out weekly action items, templates, resources, everything that we have to offer so that we can all make some noise together and get these forests the protections that they really deserve. So this is our website. Websites. You can find more information on Oregon Wild's website and what we're doing here in Oregon. You can also check out the Climate Forest website, where you can see the download from all of the work that the campaign has been doing together over the last year. And on that, I am going to pass it back off to Allie. Thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. And I'm going to jump right into the Q&A because we have quite a few questions. First of all, I'm just going to read a comment by someone just to make sure that the WECAN people see it. So this person says, I am a part of an organization of women who have worked in coal mines in the United States. We include among us women committed to the forests and waterways in our areas and would be honored to join you in this essential and beautiful work that each and all of you are doing. And they left their email. So just wanted to flag that so you can make sure to connect with that person and their organization. Perfect. And then Osprey or anyone else from WECAN, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the other global projects that you're doing.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that question. I'll just mention a few, but I really, want to ensure that I give Wanda and Rebecca and Catherine space. I don't want to take up too much space. So there's a lot of other work that we're doing, and I'll just suggest maybe in our chat that we put a link to our work. But we do work, as I mentioned, in terms of forests in the Amazon, in Ecuador and Brazil. We've just been meeting with an amazing group of women leaders in Brazil to protect the Amazon rainforest and connected ecosystems. And also in Ecuador, we've been working there for quite some time with the Living Forest proposal that was proposed by indigenous leaders to protect their forests. We also do a lot of work around finance campaigning. In other words, going to banks to get them to divest from fossil fuel extraction and biodiversity loss, which includes forests, but also areas that are being harmed by fossil fuels. So we do a lot of work around divestment. We also do a lot of work around fossil fuel resistance. And I'll just name one other piece. As Catherine was mentioning, we just came back from the United Nations climate talks in Egypt, where we brought a group of frontline leaders from all over the world to go and advocate for frontline communities, indigenous rights, climate justice, keeping fossil fuels in the ground, and a variety of things. And I think the short of it is we're involved in really urgent matters where we see that women's leadership can play a vital role. And there's an entire analysis around that I won't go into, but we know that women's leadership is key to climate solutions and environmental degradation. And statistics and studies around the world have proven that. And so we need to understand that role, and also to ensure that a lot of these crises are met in a timely fashion. And so where that nexus happens is where you're going to find WECAN. And I would just encourage people to go to our website and look at the menu on our work to go into more details of the kinds of things that I've mentioned. But thanks for the question.
Perfect. Thank you. And then, is there a way that the general public can get involved and help the cause?
Yeah, I would suggest people go to www.wecan, W-E-C-A-N, WECAN International, and then the word international spelled out .org. And I think Catherine can put that link in the chat. And we have a very active newsletter. We have a lot of webinars. We have a lot of different campaigns right now. We are involved in the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. It's a very important convention that's going on right now in Montreal, Canada, where governments are meeting to decide what is happening with biodiversity. And there's a lot of struggles going on there right now because the fix that a lot of governments have is really connected to this endless economic growth model that is extremely destructive to our forests, to biodiversity, to frontline communities. And so we're really trying to present a different vision of a way forward that has a very different analysis that puts community-led solutions first, Indigenous rights first, that has a feminist economics and circular economy first. And so I would just also suggest that people really look into how the local and global are connected, and that we can do a lot for our regions by working, digging in locally is absolutely key and the first place to go, and really uplifting Indigenous communities in the regions where you live, but also connecting to the national and global fights where you can also learn a lot and get a lot of traction and media and support for your local fights. So I think it's sort of like having a large strategy that can help you with the local struggles that you're in.
Great, thank you, Osprey. I'm just gonna pop something into the chat really quick. It's the America's Vanishing Climate Forest report that Victoria mentioned. And then I have a question for one of the WECAN people regarding the Alaska Lands Claim Act and the ANILCA. Is there any effort to get them repealed or updated?
Hi, this is Wanda and Rebecca. We mentioned that we worked with the Office of Subsistence Management on the co-management process, which is now being initiated through the federal system right now. But we haven't repealed the laws right now. We're mostly advocating for reinterpreting and the laws towards the beneficiaries, and this is where it's at. And we've got people wanting to do the same thing, but again, these laws need public information, public education, because it affects every one of us. It's public law. And right now, industry is taking advantage of Alaska's public lands and going aggressively after our timber, after our oil, gas, and mining. And this is under the land claims law because they're using Alaska Native land, private lands to do this, which is why all of around the Alaska Native villages in the Tongass, our hills have been logged out. So we're targeted as Alaska Natives. Also, America has to learn that, oh gosh, almost 60% of Alaska's land belongs to the public. So we need everybody to be aware and help us get these laws pulled away from industry and placed into the proper hands of the people and protection.
And is it the ANSCA, the second part of ANSCA?
ANILCA.
The second part of ANILCA is ANWR, which the first part of ANILCA is ANWR, and that's the oil industry.
Timber.
And timber. So they have complete control over ANILCA, and the state wants it that way. They're in control of these resources and they don't want to change them. So it would have to take a huge force of what she's saying, reinterpretation, to have this benefit the people, not the industries.
And we think the time is right to do this because politically in DC and even in the state, we've got more leverage than we did in the past. So we're advocating taking these two laws, and particularly these two laws, taking them out of last century's thinking and advancing them into this century's reality. Global warming, the crises we're in.
Thank you for the question. That's a good question.
Thank you both. Catherine, did you want to pop in about another question?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Wanda and Rebecca. I always appreciate when you all share about Anilka and Anska, because I think it's just so important to also consider all these um, different, legislative things that feel like they've been there forever, but also we can do something about it. And they have been doing really great work on that. I just wanted to, I was thinking of Jacqueline's question, what role have Senator Wyden and Merkley been playing in old and mature forest protection? And one thing that I was explicitly thinking of was the roadless rule, which we've sort of been talking about, of this push to codify the roadless rule into law to ensure that no matter who is in office in terms of the president or the Supreme Court, it will always remain. And so Wyden was actually one of the Congress members who introduced legislation to permanently protect nearly 60 million acres of wild public forests, essentially codifying the 2001 roadless rule alongside several other Congress people. And Merkley was also a part of endorsing that legislature. So that's still, that hasn't been pushed through yet, I believe, but that's still something that's kind of ongoing. And I think I'm pretty sure, Wyden's my representative in Central Oregon. I'm pretty sure. I've been to a lot of town halls with him. So, I think that I believe he sits on the Natural Resources Committee or one of those, and I feel like is oftentimes someone to see kind of for these different forest issues and legislative pieces. Of course, we always want to push our legislators further, like Victoria was saying, including, forests that are 80 or older as a part of mature old growth forests, things like that, that I think can really make a difference when we're talking about how we can protect the most forested areas in our different communities. So I just wanted to pop that in there just as something that, is kind of in my mind. And, that was a big part of our advocacy with Wanda and Rebecca and a lot of the other really great women in Alaska who went to DC. And we're not only advocating for for the roadless rule, but also for codifying it and passing that legislation. So was kind of thinking through that a little bit. And I don't know if you or Victoria have anything to add there, Allie, but yeah, just wanted to pop in.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. I actually have a question for Victoria. So what is the status of the flatland harvesting on the Mackenzie watershed?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the flat country timber sale, for folks who haven't heard of it, is proposed for 2,000 acres of mature and old growth logging in the Willamette National Forest of Oregon. And so there's been lots of momentum building up around stopping this sale. No logging has taken place yet. And we really want to make sure that it doesn't at all, or at least not according to the plans that they have laid out. So after the Holiday Farm fires and the executive order announcement, Oregon Wild and some of our allies at other organizations like Cascadia Wildlands, we filed an objection to this project in light of the new information that essentially says that we need to rethink this project given the impacts from the fires, and we need to ensure that it adheres to President Biden's directive to protect forests just like flat country. And so they did agree to pause any work that they would do on that until they are able to review it. And we very recently heard that we should expect some answers about what their thoughts on next steps are this coming January. So definitely be on the lookout for more information then. I'm sure things are really going to ramp up on the grassroots side. And in the meantime, I definitely want everyone to walk away from this with the intention to do everything that they can in their power to make as much noise about this project as we can. We definitely don't want to see it go. And I'm happy to talk more, chat offline with folks who are interested in getting involved in some grassroots work to keep flat country standing.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm just going to ask one last question to wrap it up. So what are WECAN or TWECAN's goals for 2023? since we're almost to the end of December?
Okay, well, I'll jump in. Please jump in, Rebecca, as much as you want. We have a lot of plans for 2023. I mean, I think that, I'm going to stick to our forest campaign because like I said, we do divestment work, we do work on food sovereignty, we have a lot of different programs, but for the purpose of this convening, I think it's good if we stick with our forest program. I think that, we need to, one of the things that I think is really critical strategically is that the relationship between the climate crisis and the need to have mature and old growth forests standing and the biological diversity crisis we're in all need to continue to be part of our messaging. And, of course, we have a lot of nuances around the programs that we're doing. As an example, the Escazú agreement, so that we can protect land defenders who are protecting the Amazon rainforest in Latin America, or continuing to protect the Atombe rainforest by planting more trees and protecting the old growth forests there, continuing to support and work with Wanda and Rebecca on this deep analysis that they've done around the laws that need to change so that there can be Indigenous stewardship of the Tongass as it has been for time immemorial. We do know that Indigenous peoples are key to forest protection. And so we need to have a very intersectional analysis where we realize that if we're going to really navigate the climate crisis and stop biodiversity loss, we must protect our forests and we must protect mature and old growth forests. There's no way around that. And I don't think there's enough public awareness around that. And it's something that we all collectively need to work on in our movements, in our advocacy at the policy level, at the grassroots level, at every level, because as I don't even like the word resources, our rivers, our waters, our mountains, our minerals are diminished as we live in this endless economic growth model and this capitalistic colonized model that continues to proliferate. We need to understand that these struggles are going to become more intense. There's less forests to log, there's less minerals to extract, and on it goes. So it's about, having this intersectional analysis of understanding that we must fight at the local level, tooth and nail, to protect every last river, every last tree, every last forest. We are in an emergency at so many levels, and we need to not shy away from saying that. At the same time, we need to deal with the systems that created the fact that we are in an extractive economic model, or we'll just continue to extract. So while we simultaneously take on these individual fights, which we need every ounce of that collective energy to do, it's also important to engage in the systemic approach so that we really stop this economic model and this colonized thinking that got us into these crises in the first place, that humans can forever take and take and take, without being in a place of reciprocity with nature, without giving back to nature, without powering down and living with less, and really understanding that there needs to be a climate justice framework where we ensure that frontline communities who are impacted first and worst, Indigenous communities, Black and Brown communities, are really centered, and that their leadership is brought to the forefront, and care for those communities are brought to the forefront as we care for nature, and that we also need to deal with how we're living and who we are, as much as these individual campaigns, which are critical. Thank you.
Wait, no, okay.
And there's a couple things that we're doing too here, in addition to the ongoing push to reinterpret the two laws we talked about. But we've been working with the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council. They have a new committee called Indigenous Engagement. I sit on that council, so we're going to be working very closely with WECAN in connection with networking. Also, we're developing our own charter so that we can seek funding and support from our tribe, our corporations, and groups like SEAC and others that have funding that could help get us to different meetings in different locations, so we can actually participate ourselves we've been left out of a lot of that, but we get our 2 cents worth through our correspondence and documentation. And we've also joined the action across Alaska called Just Transition. That's Alaska Native group as well.
And we're also gonna be trying to go to the herring protectors Kuik in Sitka. A part of our food is the herring, and there's a great diminishing population, and so Sitka is the last place where we can gather that food. And there's been an outstanding group called the Herring Protectors that put on a celebration for their love for the herring, and they want to share, and they go to meetings for state laws to discontinue the misuse of herring. And I'm on a board called the Indian Island Institutes, where we support youth to learn about living on the land. So anybody from around the US can apply to this summer. It's like a camp, but it's for students that want to learn about what's going on on the land and politically. So that's what we'll be doing. That's our future. And
we can gonna be part of
yeah,
it.
that's what we're going to be part of. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to chime in really quickly because I think Wanda and Rebecca, said great things. Osprey said great things. And, just to close us out, that, we are, our movements are building and they are growing. And this is really the time for everyone to dig deep and dig in and be together in all of this and start really taking the actions, whatever you're seeing in your mind, in your vision, whatever you're a part of in your community, really committing and going hard, because we are making a difference, and every step counts in all of that. And I think that, like Osprey said, we were just at COP27. We've been following the COP15 for the Convention on Biological Diversity. And you see a lot of our civil society groups intervening, having strong interventions, making strategic changes in those places. And I think we see that at the local level, at the national level, with our governments, within our communities, so really thinking about the different ways that you're taking action and how that can contribute to these larger movements for the protection of our forests, of our climate, of our planet. So just, that's always what I'm looking forward to every year, is how are we growing together and how are we building together, because that's ultimately what we're going to need to not only survive the climate crisis, but to make the changes necessary to adapt and move through it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Yes, like everyone has said, when we are going after the systems and we have grassroots support, that's when we are the strongest. So thank you everyone tonight for joining the webcast and for listening to our wonderful presenters. Thank you to our presenters for sharing all of your knowledge and tips on how to get involved and information about your amazing organizations. I just hope everyone has a great night, and let's keep digging in and get this done. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.